Good day. Even as diplomatic activity continues to settle the situation in Afghanistan following the withdrawal of US troops from that country, diplomatic activity continues also and is indeed intensifying to settle the other great war that continues in the Middle East, the war in Syria. The strange thing is, though, that whilst the diplomatic activity concerning Afghanistan receives a wide degree of international attention, the diplomatic activity to settle the war in Syria now receives far less. Nonetheless, the indications are there and they're starting to mount up, even though, as I said, they attract little attention. Firstly, as we saw a few days ago, there was that decision in the Security Council to agree to the reopening, or rather the extension of the opening of a humanitarian corridor into Idlib province. The opening of that humanitarian corridor is now time restricted for only a defined period under Russian pressure, but it is clearly a sign, as I said in a recent video, that Russia and the United States are using the question of humanitarian aid as a mechanism to start talking to each other about a final settlement of the Syrian war, which will, by the way, leave President Assad of Syria in place. There was a very interesting article recently on Russia Today by the always perspicacious and insightful Scott Ritter, which makes essentially the same point, that the debates about the humanitarian corridor really debates about a withdrawal of foreign troops, in other words, Turkish troops, from Idlib, with a view to eventually securing Syrian control over the entire territory without major battle and massive bloodshed taking place. And that is what the real and true purpose of that telephone conversation, which took place a week or so ago between President Biden of the United States and President Putin of Russia, was all about. And I also did a program a short time ago in which I discussed the prospects of a US military withdrawal from Syria and the fact that the US troops from Syria would soon be leaving that country, in light of the fact that there seem to be the first steps underway for the US to withdraw its troops from Iraq, and how Russian officials were making comments to that effect and seemed to be warning the Kurds that before very long the US would indeed be quitting Syria and leaving them exposed, essentially, unless they came to terms with the government in Damascus fairly soon. And in fact, over the last couple of days, we've had a number of contradictory reports coming out of Iraq. There was a meeting between an American official, Mr. McGurk, and the Iraqi Prime Minister, following which the BBC said that Mr. McGurk told the Iraqis that the United States is indeed intending to withdraw all its troops from Iraq, but that this would be a phased and structured withdrawal, very different from the one which took place in Afghanistan. And then the United States, through various anonymous officials, the usual anonymous officials, said that the BBC report about the discussions between Mr. McGurk and the Iraqis was wrong, and that the US is not so far planning to withdraw its troops from Iraq or from Syria. But interestingly and strikingly, there's been no formal denial either from Iraq or from the United States that that BBC report was actually true. Anyway, something has now happened which makes me think that we are indeed now, finally, in the Syrian diplomatic endgame. And it's something which, very interestingly, the Western media, including even those parts of the Western media which concentrate on Middle East coverage, such as the British-based Middle East news site Al Monitor, which covers the Middle East very carefully, which they've all ignored, but which seems to me to be a very big event indeed, and which the media in the two countries involved, China and Syria, are covering as a big event. And that is the visit to Syria and the talks between President Assad of Syria and this Chinese delegation, which took place in Damascus, the visit to Syria by Chinese Foreign Minister and member of the State Council, Wang Yi, where he met and held talks with President Bashar al-Assad. And you will all recall that I did a recent program, or a series of programs, about the way in which the Chinese have been signaling that if peace is brought to Afghanistan, they will come to Afghanistan and they will provide financial and economic support to enable the reconstruction of Afghanistan. And the words, the reports that have been published following this visit by Wang Yi to Syria and his talks there with President Assad, they suggest to me very strongly that China is also looking to provide economic assistance to Syria when the war ends, and will take the primary role in Syria's reconstruction. Now, I said that this is a big event. To get a sense of how big it is, I would add that in all the years of the conflict since 2011, when the Syrian conflict began, I cannot recall any Chinese official of Wang Yi's seniority or importance visiting Syria. Perhaps other Chinese officials have done, and I'm quite sure that lower level and middle rank Chinese officials have done on probably numerous occasions, though it's probably been done in a private way. But this is the first time, to my knowledge, that an official of this importance from China has visited Syria and has done so in such a public way and held public talks with President Assad in the way that Wang Yi has done. I would add that Wang Yi's visit to Syria follows an arc of visits that Wang Yi has been making, visiting various Central Asian states and also visiting a number of Arab states. And the Arab states that he is traveling to, and also meeting their leaders, include Egypt and Algeria. So this is an important set of visits that Wang Yi is making, an important diplomatic tour. But it is striking that he included Damascus over the course of this trip, over this diplomatic tour that he is currently engaged in. So let's actually go to the substance of what was discussed between Wang Yi and President Assad during their meeting in Damascus. And we go first to the Chinese, and this is what appears in Global Times, as I said, the unofficial mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party, the English language mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party, and this is what it says. Syria supports China unconditionally on the issues related to Taiwan and Hong Kong, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said at a meeting on Saturday with visiting Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Wang voiced China's opposition towards any attempt to seek regime change in Syria and welcomed Syria to join the Belt and Road Initiative. So, President Assad has been careful to say and to remind his Chinese visitor that Syria has been an unequivocal supporter of China's one China policy. It considers that China is one and indivisible, and it includes Taiwan and Hong Kong. In other words, he is reminding Wang Yi that Syria has always been a staunch ally and friend of China's, and China in return says to President Assad that he and China are welcoming Syria to join the Belt and Road Initiative, this enormous infrastructure plan whereby China seeks to integrate the Central Asian economies and Russia into its own through a massive program of building roads, railways, ports, airports, pipelines, and all the rest. And that, of course, is a mechanism to provide Syria with economic aid and with assistance towards economic reconstruction. And we also learn that from Global Times, comments like this. Since the establishment of diplomatic ties 65 years ago, China and Syria have always trusted and supported each other, Wang said. China appreciates Syria's firm support on the issues related to China's core interests and stands ready to work with Syria in carrying forward the mutually beneficial cooperation. Reaffirming China's strong support for Syria in safeguarding national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national dignity, Wang said that China opposes any attempt to seek regime change in Syria. He pledged that China will continue its strong support for Syria in handling domestic problems under the Syrian-led, Syrian-owned principle established by the UN Security Council. Syria has made remarkable achievements in combating terrorism and exposing external interference under the leadership of Assad, adding that Assad's re-election reflects the strong trust and support of the Syrian people. Blatant foreign interventions in Syria failed in the past and will not succeed in the future. China will continue to provide medications and other medical supplies to help the Syrian people combat the current infection. Some time ago, about 2 months ago, I did a program about the steps the Russians are taking to break the economic blockade on Syria. I mentioned that there are ships that have been transporting medications to Syria to combat the infection. Wang Yi has just confirmed that those medications come from China, and that's what that refers to. And then it goes on to say, on speeding up the reconstruction process in Syria, China welcomes Syria to become a new partner in joining the BRI. China will also support Syria in opposing unilateral sanctions and combating terrorist forces, Wang said, adding that China is willing to strengthen cooperation with Syria to help its anti-terror capabilities. That is the first hint that China is going to provide military aid to Syria directly. Up to now, that's been left to the Russians, but the Chinese are now hinting that they're going to provide Syria with help and assistance in that respect. I'm going to guess that it's going to be help with surveillance systems and drones, areas where China excels. The heavy hardware will continue to be provided by Russia. So there we are, and it finishes, the Global Times article finishes. Wang also expressed serious hope to take part in BRI construction, strengthen cooperation with China in the fields of economy, science, culture and education, and join hands in fighting terrorism. So a pledge from China to provide Syria with massive help to rebuild Syria's economy, and Syria in return is expected to join the Belt and Road Initiative, something which, of course, the Syrians are probably delighted to do. And I would add that in making all of these comments, Wang Yi is clearly giving a warning to someone else, not just to countries like the United States, which are imposing sanctions upon Syria, but also specifically to Turkey, which is becoming increasingly dependent economically on China. When Wang Yi talks about opposing external interference and how Assad's re-election reflects the strong trust and support of the Syrian people, and how China supports Syria's efforts to safeguard its national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national dignity, and how China opposes any attempt to seek regime change in Syria, it's not difficult to see that China is taking a very strong line here, which diametrically opposes all the things that President Erdogan and Turkey have been doing in Syria. So from now on, President Erdogan is under notice that if he continues to interfere and meddle in Syria in the way that he has been doing, supplying jihadi groups there, interfering in Syrian affairs, casting doubt on the legitimacy of President Assad's government, helping in the economic restrictions that are being imposed on Syria, then he is doing that against China's wishes and against China's policy, and at a time when Turkey is facing increasing economic pressure, when the situation in Turkey itself is becoming increasingly difficult, when Turkey is finding itself under increasing pressure from the United States, and when Turkey will increasingly need help from China if it is going to ride out these difficulties, that is a warning which I suspect President Erdogan will either heed or will be wise to heed. A few years ago, when there was a previous crisis with the lira, and when the Turkish central bank was almost out of funds, it was to China that Erdogan turned for financial aid to bolster Ankara's foreign currency reserves. And if Erdogan wants the same thing to happen again, if he needs the same kind of financial support from China, then he needs to read or be aware of these comments that Wang Yi made on this trip to Damascus, and he needs to consider very carefully whether the Chinese might be as forthcoming with financial support as they were in the past if he continues to go against Chinese policy in Syria. Anyway, that's what the Chinese have said. The Syrians, of course, have also covered this visit. And I will also comment on what the Syrian news agency, this is the official Syrian news agency, Sana, has to say about all of this. And this is the report from Sana, and it's dateline 17th July 2021. President Bashar al-Assad on Saturday received Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and the accompanying delegation and discussed historic and distinguished relations between the two friendly countries. During the meeting, it was agreed to move towards a new stage in strengthening these relations and opening wider horizons for bilateral cooperation in all fields to serve the interests of the two countries and people. President al-Assad affirmed that China is a strong country and has a great and significant position on the international arena, adding that Syria looks forward to expanding areas of cooperation with it in all domains based on its strong presence and its ethical policies which serve most countries and peoples of the world. President Bashar al-Assad thanked China for its support to the Syrian people in various fields and its important stances at the international forums in support of Syria's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independent decision. Syria's participation in the Belt and Road Initiative was also discussed during the meeting, as the Chinese minister stressed his country's interests in Syria's participation in the initiative due to its location and its important regional role. He, that's to say Wang Yi, underlined that China will continue in supporting the Syrian people in the war against terrorism, confrontation of the blockade and inhuman sanctions imposed on them, as well as standing against the interference in the domestic affairs of the Syrian people and whatever affects the territorial integrity of Syria. Wang conveyed congratulations of Chinese President Xi Jinping to President al-Assad on winning the presidential election, noting that the success of this entitlement indicates the people's victory and their firm determination to resist all challenges and domination attempts which they are exposed to. So in essence, the Syrian version of events of the meeting corresponds almost exactly with the Chinese one. In other words, China backs Syria's territorial integrity, its national independence. It recognizes the legitimacy of President Bashar al-Assad's government and his recent election. China is opposed to the sanctions, and it has invited Syria to join China's Belt and Road Initiative, something which, as I said, I am sure the Syrians will be keen to join, and which I'm sure they will announce they will join very soon. Now, the reason the Chinese have visited Syria, the reason that Wang Yi has gone to Syria at this time, I am sure, is because the Chinese believe that the war in Syria is rapidly coming to an end. They are undoubtedly being kept informed by the Russians of the diplomatic contacts the Russians have with the US, and I'm sure that they're also being kept informed by the Iraqis about what is going on too. And they almost certainly know that the United States is indeed going to withdraw its troops from Iraq before very long, and will indeed be withdrawing its troops from Syria also. It's the presence of US troops in Syria depends, for logistical reasons, on the US preserving a military presence in Iraq. If the US military presence in Iraq is wound down, so the US military presence in Syria must be also. Once the US troops are withdrawn, the position of Turkey and the presence of Turkish troops in Syria becomes diplomatically and politically untenable, and the Chinese are making that very clear to Turkey in all the comments that Wang Yi made in Damascus. And what the Chinese are saying is that obviously the United States and the European Union and perhaps some of the Arab states may want to continue their policy of economic suffocation of Syria, but China is prepared to back Syria's reconstruction, and it wants to see Syria in the Belt and Road Initiative. And that is what China will do. So once again, we see once more the Chinese-Russian strategic partnership in operation. The Russians do all the heavy diplomatic and military lifting. They talk to all the parties, they do all the negotiations. They're very good at that sort of thing. They will also play the key military role, as they have done in Syria. And then China and its companies and its money and its infrastructure people, they will move in to consolidate the political and strategic victory that the Russians have won. This is a carefully coordinated strategy which the Russians and the Chinese are following together. They're working together on Afghanistan, and they're now working together on Syria too. And as for the West, the days when it could control these situations, when it could impose sanctions and try to suffocate economies and affect regime change in those countries, either through sanctions or through supporting militia groups like the ones that it is trying to use in Syria. Those days are coming to an end. And the sooner the West and certain people in Washington grasp that fact, the better it will be for everyone. Well, thank you for joining me for this program today. I hope you will join me in future programs, both on this channel and on our other channels, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend, Alex Christoforou. Please also check out Alex's channel. You'll find links under this video. Please also check us out on our various other platforms, BitChute, SuperU, and Locals. We have particular plans for SuperU and Locals especially. And please also support us to the extent that you can by through PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar, and by going to our shop and buying the amazing things you will find there. Our magic mugs, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, our t-shirts, and all the rest. And last but not least, please don't forget to tick the like button on this video and also to check your subscription to this channel. Thank you for joining me today. I look forward to you joining me again in future when I do more videos on this channel and on our other channels, and have a wonderful day until then.